Episode 6 of Life on Earth is called Invasion of the Land, and it mainly deals with amphibians, though we open up with mud skippers. So obviously we talked about fish in the last episode, however that was mainly just the ray-finned fish. We didn't actually talk about lobe-finned fish, and they're the ones that actually led to amphibians, they're the first ones that got into land. So I think it was actually good that we talked about them here, and they obviously should be talked about. Mud skippers are actually ray-finned fish, but they, look a bit more like the first fish that would have come into land. And they're a good way to open the episode, because the very important step from fish to amphibian needs to be covered, and they're a pretty good example because at least they look like the in-between. So that was good. And we move on to talk about the lobe-finned fish. We talk about coelacanths. So coelacanths, for a long time, were actually believed to be extinct until they started popping up off the coast of Africa. One popped up in South Africa. Then eventually they found that there was more off the coast of Mozambique, where people were catching them kind of semi-regularly. And the stuff with the coelacanth is great. It's a properly historic moment. It was the first time that coelacanths had ever been filmed before. And people generally thought they were extinct until like 30 years before the series came out. It's pretty crazy. It's interesting hearing about the behind-the-scenes stuff of that, because they actually really wanted to get a shot of Attenborough with a coelacanth. They couldn't, unfortunately. So to illustrate the coelacanths, he uses a dried up one that's been caught previously. But after Attenborough had left, one was actually caught, and the camera team who were still there were able to film it, and it's pretty incredible. It's a really weird looking animal, and I don't think I've ever seen coelacanths since. It's a pretty incredible bit of footage, and I think it's undoubtedly, for me, the highlight of the episode. It's very, very good. And then we talk about lungfish. So lungfish are also great, because they're also similar. Coelacanths obviously have that fin, which is kind of closer to what we have in terms of our, pentadactyl limb. But the lungfish is interesting because it can actually breathe air. Amber basically finds one that's basically estivating, and he puts it in a tank of water and he watches it eventually wake up, and it's a really cool sequence. I really like it. Again, lungfish, you don't really see them at all either. There's a lot of stuff in this series which is really important in terms of evolutionary history, but very rarely ever pops up in series after it. They did a really good point of illustrating what those early fish to amphibian animals were like. It was very good. We see some fossils of what the first amphibians would have been like. There's just quite a comedic sequence of a sort of plastic early amphibian in a sort of swamp. It's quite cheesy, to be honest, by today's standards, and I'm not sure how much it works, but it is kind of fun and charming in a weird way. And then we talk about amphibians. We talk about the largest amphibians alive today, the Japanese salamander. It's a good way of segueing into them. And we talk about other newts and salamanders. The newts get a fair bit of screen time, I think, at that point of the episode. We see newts basically going back to the water. We see them in the water mating. It's interesting actually, because you think of newts as being, pretty well designed to live on land. They look a bit more like lizards, but when you see them in the water, you see that they actually are pretty similar to fish in a lot of ways. The way they obviously breed is similar to fish. Obviously amphibians have to reproduce in water for the most part, and I think that was actually quite a good sequence. It was good seeing newts. It was quite good. Other salamanders we see, things like axolotls, they obviously have to live in water. That's good. To do a good job of illustrating the point of tadpoles to adult amphibians. The caecilians are really good, because caecilians, I feel like, almost would in theory be missed, but they're really important. It's really important that we talk about them. They're really cool. The fact that they look like worms, but you do see when they come to the surface and they're feeding, it is very obviously not a worm at all. It's got a mouth and it's, feeding on worms. That was a really good sequence. I like that. That was actually one of the better parts of the amphibian sequence. And then the rest of the episode deals with frogs and toads. So if you like frogs and toads, this is the episode for you, because at least 35 minutes of the episode deals with frogs and toads. Gotta say, by the end of the episode, I was a bit like, I think we've maybe dragged the arse out of this a little bit. Don't know if we needed quite as much in the frogs. To be honest, I feel like it was literally just because they needed to fill the episode, and so there was a lot of stuff about frogs and toads. Overall, this stuff is good, it's interesting, but it does go on a bit. We do see a lot of different types of frogs. The Goliath frog is highlighted as being the largest one. The flying frog is detailed quite a bit. It's interesting as well, watching it glide through the trees. It's actually weird watching it do that, because it obviously fans out his webbed feet, but then it keeps it quite close to his body. That's interesting. I hadn't really noticed that before. It was quite cool. Various frogs and toads have weird ways of defending themselves. The European toad is highlighted. It basically makes itself look really big to intimidate grass snakes. That was quite good. It's quite a fun sequence. I have seen that before in other things, but again, it was good to highlight here. Poison dart frogs as well. Some frogs and toads can secrete poison. They're the most famous ones for that. Highlight how colour is so vital for them. They really are extremely colourful, and obviously know that. But when you see the full diversity of them in that little montage, you do kind of go, wow, they are very iridescent. Then we talk about the way they feed. Obviously, frogs are famous for having that long, sticky tongue. The highlight of that was basically an amphibian invention almost. It evolved in them. Obviously, other animals like chameleons have adopted that. They do a good job of highlighting how that operates. And actually, the way that frogs eat is interesting, because frogs don't actually have bones, concealing their eyes. In theory, when they close their mouths, their eyes basically enter the same space. That's crazy. I never thought of that. So they actually have to keep blinking to, do that. Also to keep their eyes waterproof. And that's interesting because that's something that even we do. The reason we have eyelids is because our eyes are still evolved to be in water, essentially. They obviously highlight how vocal frogs are. Frogs and toads are the most vocal amphibians. They're some of the most vocal animals outside of birds. They've got these really large throat sacs that, obviously hold a lot of air that they're able to utilize to, generate quite a wide diversity of vocalization. Mating behavior is also tackled. The main mating sequence we get is the toads again. A lot of toads migrate to the same ponds, there's loads of them, and they basically just pile onto each other and they're just mating with anything in sight that they can grab hold of. That was interesting, it was quite fun. I have seen toads mating in real life and it is, pretty chaotic, and this sequence did a really good job of showing that. And then from there we talk about the various ways that frogs look after their young. Obviously most tadpoles need to be in water. A lot of frogs are actually able to stay away from water. You see frogs on this big plateau in Guyana, next to a big waterfall, and all the spray creates a lot of puddles, so frogs are able to lay their spawn in that. Interesting, lianas are obviously highlighted. Things like pitcher plants are obviously really vital for a lot of tropical frogs, especially poison dart frogs. And looking at some paternal care, some frogs actually embed their eggs in their back and the skin just grows over it, and obviously the tadpoles just mature in there and they burst out. There's another frog that gives birth to live young because it basically just retains the frog in its body, which is interesting because it's very rare to hear about that in amphibians. The Darwin's frog is probably the best part of that sequence, I think. It's this little frog that will hold its tadpole in its mouth, it matures into a froglet, and then it just spits out. That's really good. Interesting about that is that the guy who filmed that was there for like 4 weeks or something like that, like some insane amount of time just filming this frog in his little studio, waiting for this $1 million shot of it just spewing up its young. And then the last major bit of footage we get features a frog in the desert. These obviously, quite famous, quite fat desert frogs in Australia, and it basically burrows underground and it's estivating. It's got this membrane around it, and when the rains come, it moistens up, it wakes up, and it is able to, return to the surface and breed and live its life for that brief period of time. That was alright. And the last bit of footage we get shows Attenborough with this desert frog talking about how an animal like an amphibian, which is so tied to water, is still able to live in a desert, but it's far from thriving. In order to truly thrive in these really dry habitats, you need to lay watertight eggs, which leads very well into the next episode, which obviously deals with the reptiles. That's good with ending things. I will say something about this episode is that they talk about all this wide diversity of frogs and toads, but they very rarely actually name them. You don't really get species names for them, so you just kind of feel like you're looking at, this is a frog, this is a frog. Look, I'm being a bit lazy and just calling them frogs and toads without giving specific names by and large, but that's because the episode just doesn't give them. Overall, this episode is good. The first part of the episode is great, I would say. The stuff with the coelacanths and the lungfish, tremendous stuff. And some of the stuff with the amphibians, I like the Sicilians, and I like some of the frog stuff. The Darwin's frog was really good, but by and large, the frog stuff does go on quite a bit, and as I say, it does feel like they're just trying to fill the hour a little bit. There wasn't enough to talk about. Probably why they kept some of the fish stuff for this episode, to be honest, which is actually the best part of the episode for me. So yeah, this episode, probably my least favourite, to be honest, at this point. I think it will get better because we move into more animals that I'm interested in. But yeah, overall, this episode is good, still good, there's still a lot of good stuff in it, though it does go on a bit with the frogs, and, maybe we didn't need quite as much of time spent on that. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video, what you think of this episode, let me know, and I'll be doing the next one next week, which obviously is about reptiles, so look forward to that. As ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want to, it's perfectly fine, and I'll see you next time, and goodbye.